Rolling.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Catch the Sky podcast. This is your host, Sweet Tea, and with me again this week is Dick Francisco, and also joining us this week is Corey Ferraro. He is both an educator and a theologian, as well as a father, and we appreciate him joining us on the show this week. So thank you, Corey.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
If you care to comment on anything that you hear this week, you may do so on Twitter at CTS Terry or at I'm Dick Francisco. You can find Dick on Instagram at the Dick Francisco, and you may find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts by searching for the Catch the Sky podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe. And this week we wanted to get back to a conversation that we've obviously had several times before, but whenever we do, it's typically just Dick and I, or Safe and I, or the three of us, and we usually all kind of agree, right? So we wanted to invite somebody in that has some differing viewpoints and see if we can maybe find some middle ground and educate some people and maybe get people to just think about things a little bit differently. So is that fair to say? I think that's what we're trying to get out of this episode, right, Dick?
Yeah.
yeah. So before we get started, Corey, you want to give us a little bit of background on where you're coming from, and I guess I should fill the viewers in on what we're talking about this week. We'll be discussing abortion again, and the Supreme Court obviously just recently overturned that, and so we've had some hot takes. A lot of people have had some hot takes. And so instead of just having hot takes on opposing sides, we're going to have them all together right here and see if we can find some middle ground. So, sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, that's totally fine. Yeah, my name is Corey. I'm from Erie, Pennsylvania. I got my undergrad degree in Catholic theology with a focus on medical ethics and moral theology from Gannon University in Erie. I went on to get my master's as well in theology from there, and I actually just finished getting my certification to become a principal.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Teaching. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to play Jeopardy with you.
Well, if the categories are on religion, I'd do okay, but I don't know.
Right? Yeah. That's where I need help, though, Corey. That's where I need help.
But yeah, this is a topic that is really near and dear to my heart. I've been talking about abortion over the last basically 3 decades of my life with students and things like that. And I'm really excited to be here. And I hope, that I'm able to kind of communicate my perspective and the Catholic Church's perspective on abortion in a way that is respectful. But like you were saying earlier, also to maybe give, some people some food for thought, to kind of look at things from the other side of the coin. And I should point out, too, that way back in the day, I taught Sweet Tea. He was a great student. Yeah, I had to throw him out of the class just like maybe once a week, twice a week.
It wasn't that
bad behavior.
Well, so
No.
I always tell the story.
Right?
To this day, I think I've told Dick this story of the time that I ate 6 plates of fettuccine and I ended up showing up late to your class by like 5 minutes. I was just dying, sweating up the stairs. And I walked in and you're like, go down and get a demerit. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, Mr. Farrar, I just ate 6 plates of fettuccine. Can you cut me some slack here? And you're like, you just doubted that story. You're like, that's what you have? Like, that's the best you got? And everybody was like, no, he really just did it. He really just did it. And you let me slide that day. You let me slide just because you were that impressed.
Well, yeah. I thought you were going to say that I still made you go down and I would have apologized to you.
No. You legitimately were like, oh my God, that's impressive. Just take a seat.
I can actually remember. I remember you sitting in that desk just sweating and like struggling the entire class.
It was terrible.
Fettuccine sweats? Is that what that was, T?
There's so much butter.
Loaded.
So much butter. Oh my God, it's terrible. Yeah, like Michael Scott in that episode of The Office. Absolutely
I was just
terrible.
thinking a fun run.
Yeah.
So something that might be helpful, I know it was helpful to me, that might be helpful to the listeners. Before we got on air here, Corey, you were sharing a little bit about kind of timing of this topic for you, and why or how you kind of have been spending your time discussing the topic. And I wanted to explore that a little bit more with you as to what, beyond just your religious motivation to communicate about it, tell us a little bit about that story of timing as to this topic being that important to you.
Well, I mean, I really started getting into my Roman Catholic faith when I was in high school back in the 90s. And that was also the time period when abortions were statistically at their highest in the United States. And the Catholic Pope at that time, St. Pope John Paul II, or Pope St. John Paul II, he really kind of made a rallying cry to Catholics to really kind of, speak up and be a voice for the voiceless. And he wrote an encyclical, which is just a fancy term for a papal document called Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. And he really rallied Catholics to stand against abortion, and not just abortion, but also the death penalty and also physician-assisted suicide. People throw around that term pro-life a lot, but in my experience, a lot of people who call themselves pro-life are not pro-life. And I don't mean to say that in a disrespectful way, but if you're going to say that you're pro-life, you have to be in favor of preserving life in all of its forms, from conception to natural end. And, that includes being against something like the death penalty, which I am against, or being against physician-assisted suicide, which I am against, or, being against things like human trafficking, racism, things that divide the human family. You're saying that every life is sacred. And so really from that time when I started getting into my faith, I really made it a mission in my life to stand against all those things which I view as wrong, all the things I mentioned earlier. And, over the last, several years, I've been trying to, teach my students, okay, here's what the church, puts forward on these topics. I don't force them to believe anything. I don't grade them based on how much they accept. I've had students who have left my room disagreeing with me in the church, and that's, while that saddens me, I'm not going to force anybody to believe anything, because you can't really force belief on somebody. You can't force faith. But, hopefully trying to plant some seeds and help people to realize that, every human life is sacred. Every human life needs to be protected.
And I think that is all admirable, right? I think we can agree upon that, right, Dick?
Yeah, I think that was kind of how you wanted to start this, was really some of those places where we can all agree.
Yeah.
I think that's where my questions start to come in, though, because I think there's a huge responsibility associated with being supportive of life in all its forms and suggesting that it's sacred, that the quality of the life that's lived should matter just as much. So I think you just acknowledged that from where conception is and where life starts and how that matters to you all the way through an end of life, all that time spent in between, are we doing our best, and are we positioning ourselves, and are we championing those things that create the best quality of life for people too? And I know listeners of this show will know how I feel about health and wellness, that I am incredibly passionate about that topic, and us taking care of ourselves and then therefore our children. And I think that's where I get a little confused sometimes about, and maybe that's where we do agree, is not everyone that says they are pro-life really are, because once that life is in this world, where are we at? Because there's a whole lot of lives being lived that are, even societally, the things we allow to promote in society do not take care of the best quality of life of the lives that are now in this world.
So,
and that's where I think, now that abortion is illegal, or going to become illegal in these states, the state has a responsibility to increase the number of programs that are available to help pregnant women, and also to promote better the ones that are there. And this is an area where I'm quite proud of my faith tradition, because we have a lot of programs that exist that help out those who are scared, pregnant, who are in the poverty levels, who have children that, they're trying to raise in difficult situations. My wife and I regularly make donations to a place called the Mercy Center for Women, which takes some of the clothing that my children have grown out of and the toys that they no longer use. And they take that from all donors, and they give those supplies to young mothers who are in need. We also sponsor a child through World Vision, which is a Catholic sponsorship program. We have a child that we help to pay for her food and clothing in school that lives over in Tanzania. Sometimes I think, and I brought this up on Facebook, that sometimes we get lulled into this thing. It's a philosophical fallacy, and it's called false dilemma, where we begin to think that there's only two options. Either number one, we have to keep abortion illegal, or number two, kids are going to be born and suffer. And the reality is that there is a third option there. We can have abortion illegal, but we need to make sure that we take care of and do our best to assist these moms, whether they choose to keep the child or give the child up for adoption, to make sure that the child has the best quality of life possible and that the mom feels supported. That is essential. That's essential. If we just make abortion illegal, but we don't increase the amount we help women, then we are failing at our ultimate mission of being pro-life, in my opinion.
So
I would say, T, that is another one of those places that we can all agree that I can appreciate.
Well, you say it takes a village, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I can appreciate the belief, and the stance that Corey is taking with the responsibility associated with it, right? Because we have to be responsible then for, our principles and what our beliefs are. Our beliefs come with accountability and responsibility, and I do think that is one that I often struggle with. Maybe T, I think I was telling you about this, and not to take us off track, but back to that, how are we really taking care of women and children, not just in this country, but across the world, relative to this belief that abortion isn't a U.S. discussion or a U.S. issue. It's one of the most debated things across the world. And so, and in, legally and otherwise, just from a healthcare perspective. And so taking a stance that abortion should be illegal and that we don't that abortion isn't supported is it has some serious obligations and accountability then for the world's children at that stage. And it's one thing for us to hope that we're helping that child in another state, across the street, across the world, but are we even equipped enough to do that? And so I think, T, I was mentioning to you the other day, I go to my mailbox, and again, I think most of our listeners know, but I will make it clear. I do not have children, so I am in a household that there are 0 children, and fairly certain children haven't lived at this address for a very long time. But I am aware that there is a baby formula shortage out in the world at this stage, specifically in this country, and I go out to my mailbox, and there is this box in my mailbox with my address on it, with a name that does not belong to my household. And it says this name or
current resident.
Current resident. And it says Wonder Box. I'm like, and it's got a baby on it. I'm like, what is this? And it is a whole box of baby formula. Now, the first thing that should be suggested to me is, wow, I get to find a lucky recipient of this since I don't have a child and there's a shortage of this out in the world. I get to go and help a child.
You're like Willy
nutrients.
Wonka.
You don't realize just how Willy Wonka that is. So back to my health and wellness. I want to be really, really clear that before I put anything in my body, therefore before I put anything in anybody else's body that I would suggest to somebody, I'm going to know exactly what it does in my body, and I'm going to know exactly what it does in your body.
You went through the nutrition facts,
get to know these things. Well, of course I did. Of course I did, because I am aware of what is in baby formula.
Yeah,
and the first ingredient in baby formula is corn syrup solids.
Oh,
we know corn syrup solids lead to obesity. Like, the second thing was vegetable oil. We know that these two quote unquote ingredients that aren't nutrients, literally when I went and looked at the breakdown of what this formula was, that's to be the nutrition that this child is first and foremost going to get. Because I understand that not every woman can breastfeed. I absolutely understand that. But there are better options. But it would have been the intention of this world to tell me that the best thing I could have done is give that to a child. And I can't. My belief system won't let me do that. But that's what we're putting out societally to take care of our children, to make them sick, human beings. Like, I struggle with that. I was like, how can we support having all of these children if we don't know how to do this right? And that's where I just get really twisted up about, okay, I'm all about supporting the lives that are in this world, but I don't know if we know how to do that.
And currently, I just looked it up before this episode, and it's still pretty consistent. The population of the Earth is double what it was 50 years ago. And so we're currently dealing with some issues on how to feed ourselves properly, and we're obviously dealing with
and metabolic health crises are top of that list as to how people and why people are dying. So I do care about people from life to death, but man, we are not taking care of people societally to get to that, quality of life, death.
It would honestly take almost an entire paradigm shift for how we are willing to live in our society.
Yeah.
And I think the more people who embrace the idea that you don't have to live the way society is telling you to live, the better. Like, I mean, just think, for example, and I bring this example up to my students all the time. Think about buffets. In the name of convenience, we have all this food out there, and they can't give it away because of the laws, and these are good laws about how long things can be sitting out under heat lamps or whatever. So think about the amount of food that is thrown out from buffets daily. Or think about the amount of food that is thrown out from supermarkets because it stays out too long and nobody buys it. And, I mean, we, as a society, we have to be willing to change, and every single person can make this change on their own and not support the things that, are so wasteful. And if we all do that, we can begin to make a bigger difference and send a message. Maybe I'm idealistic, but that's what I think.
So no, Corey, I don't think that is idealistic per se. I think it's where I am imploring the right to life community to take on that cause, right? Like, I was talking about this with somebody about abortion and going, okay, what has happened, like, for me, like, relative to seeing that, like, I'm in Arizona. And so in Arizona, there's a debate right now about what the abortion law is going to be, because there's some history of a previous law on the books, and then what is being pressed. There was anywhere from it's completely illegal to it's illegal after the first 15 weeks. Nonetheless, all very hotly contested at the legislative level. And no matter what we acknowledge, though, that it's a states' rights issue then, that's what has happened realistically, is that the states are now going to be put in the position. So that's where our votes matter relative to our local politicians. But instead of getting tied into this right to life or right to choice debate and, it being so polarized, I acknowledge to those folks coming to me saying, well, this is the worst thing ever because we're pro-choice, that I said, okay, but then if you want to hold on to that belief and be so clear about that, where are you, instead of on the picket line arguing and fighting? I'm not saying there isn't a place for that, but then where's the educational component to help these girls and these women before they get pregnant, then to help them understand the choices that they do have well before we're in this situation? And I think that goes for both sides. I think, from a pro-life standpoint and a pro-choice, we could both be spending that time. And I think on the pro-life side, there is a lot of that conversation, especially when it's religious based, about family planning and making that decision at the right time for you. But I think we sometimes then get caught at so stuck in that we aren't acknowledging that responsibility. Where is the movement to make that paradigm shift? I think the Right to Life Coalition should be just as active in that press, because you want life, you want the best life. I need you people joining me out there talking about why health and wellness is literally fundamental and like so core to who we are, to make that paradigm shift. And that isn't who I'm finding hanging out with me.
Wait, you mean McDonald's and Domino's is not the best thing for me?
Yeah,
Is that
T,
what you're
you and I
saying?
have gone rounds on this, right? Because I do care about your quality of life. And despite the fact that you have a six pack from eating pizza every day, bro, I think we could do better.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, if I was eating like I was out there, God only knows. So, like you mentioned, I think you mentioned there will be a debate regarding this. Now, this always comes up, the 15 weeks. There's always some limit set, and I think this is where a lot of people this is where the line starts to get drawn, right, between people of different beliefs, right? Is where does human life begin? So I
Hmm.
think everybody here, I mean, falls in a different camp, right? So I am from. I guess I'll start that. Said it before that I believe it's when they're born. When they're actually born in a viable human being outside of the body, and that is how our law treats it. As I stated, there was a story just the other day of a woman getting pulled over in the HOV lane, and she was pregnant, and she's arguing now that, well, since I have a human inside of me, that should count as two passengers, right? So again, that would be part of this paradigm shift, or a lot of our other laws would have to shift to allow child tax credits, right? Things of that nature. So we can talk about that a little bit more later. I'll allow you guys to share whatever you'd like.
Yeah, and I don't know if so because I honestly don't disagree with the statement that life happens at conception. I'm not actually here to debate that because I think for me because I'm not coming from that camp that I fundamentally believe at this stage that I have to preserve that life. I can call it life, and I still don't have to say that I fundamentally, personally believe that the choice isn't still mine. And I think that I know causes consternation for people, but I think where I come from on that is I have a hard time acknowledging that, especially if my life is jeopardized by that life, like whose life is more valuable. And I understand the religious side of that relative to not my choice to get to choose that. But I do believe it is my choice. That's, my tenets and beliefs. And so I'm not actually going to debate that it doesn't happen at conception. I will just come from that place that I believe in my right to be able to choose whether I end that life inside of me or not.
Yeah. Well, my perspective on it is, it's interesting. I had a student who sent me a very interesting article, a former student named Bryce, who sent me a very interesting article about, the debate in the scientific community on when life begins. And there were 5 different main points in life's existence on when personhood begins and human life begins.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was reading through it. And at the end of the day, when life begins is a philosophical question that can't necessarily be proven. But the one that I go with is conception, because at conception, you've got human DNA present and you've got the human growth process starting. So if something has the genetics of a human and is growing like a human, then in my mind, that is a human being, a human person with unique genetics. And so to go to your point about you believing it's a life, but not necessarily a life. And I don't want to misquote you. You said that you believe that it's a life, but what you said, you believe it's a life, but you still believe that you have like the choice.
Well, yeah, that it's my choice to abort that life inside of me. Yes.
See, my response to that would be, okay, well, if it is really a human being, a human person, the most fundamental right that all human beings and human persons are granted is the right to live. So, we do have freedoms in our world and in our countries, but our freedoms do have limitations when they begin to infringe upon the rights of others. So if my decision is going to take away the most basic right, the right to life, away from somebody else, someone who is completely defenseless and cannot defend that right on their own or speak up on their behalf, then that's why I am opposed to abortion. Now, I should say that I understand, it's tough. When you discuss this stuff on a logical level and on a philosophical level,
Right.
it can sometimes come off cold.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
I want to make a plea to all the women who are listening to this that, being a man, I cannot even imagine what it would be like to be in a position where you are pregnant and scared and alone. I please believe I'm not trying to come off cold in any way.
All right.
It's just in my viewpoint, and I think I can make some pretty good arguments to support this. In my viewpoint, the choice to abort the child is going to make the situation much, much worse for obviously both baby and for mother as well. Obviously the child does not get the chance to live, but there are also some pretty big side effects of abortion too. Women who have had abortions go on to have some difficulties with further future pregnancies. I actually know a woman who had 2 abortions when she was in college, and she wound up miscarrying 2 of her 4 children after she got married. It can also have some psychological effects too. And I'm not going to put the label of post-abortion syndrome on it because I know that's hotly debated, but there are women who have had forms of depression because of that decision to have an abortion.
I mean, it's a stressful decision, right?
It's interesting. What's that?
It's a stressful decision to have to go through if they...
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So the Catholic Church, because we have the all-male priesthood and the all-male hierarchy, we get bashed as anti-women. But one of the big reasons that we are against abortion is because we want to protect women. We want women to realize that making this choice can affect them on a physical and on a psychological level. So I guess that's where my faith tradition comes from, is that, it is a human being from conception on. And since it's a human being, a human person, that person must have that fundamental right that all persons have, the right to live. And we must do our best to protect that. Now, it's not like the church is saying, okay, if you're 14 and you're scared that, hey, you got to be a mom now. No, give that child up for adoption. Give it to a family who is not able to get pregnant but wants to have a child. No one in their right mind would ever force a 14-year-old to be a mom, but encourage that 14-year-old to give the child up for adoption, not to have an abortion, which again kills the child, but also can, hurt her for the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think that's where I think it's difficult. And I want to just appreciate both of you for having the conversation and kind of acknowledging and knowing that there's still a peripheral element to you guys as men to have the conversation, but I still really appreciate it. I would say that idea of infringing upon others' lives and that notion of, so for instance, when it gets real deep into those debates of protecting that life no matter what, even if it's in a case of rape, even if that child that's being carried is threatening the life of the mother, or we acknowledge that the mother may have not survived the birth of that child, all of those beg that question for me of there's an infringement regardless of the fact that it was a choice sometimes, not always, for a woman to get pregnant. And that's where I get concerned about not having the option there at all, and that slippery slope of bodily autonomy that I really believe is important. I get to share with you guys that you're right about everything you said about what abortion does, because I've been there. I've gotten to feel all of those things, and you're absolutely 100% right about all of those things. They are not easy decisions. They have long-lasting impacts physically, emotionally, mentally that never go away. That never goes away. And so absolutely, that makes me somebody who wants to then have the conversation with my fellow female well before they're put in that situation to have to make that decision. But I also know that the amount of trauma physically, emotionally, mentally that happens when someone is violated and that takes place isn't fair either. And so there's so much unfairness about that quality of that life and the violation that takes place to humans, because we do bad things to each other, man. Like, it happens. And when those choices aren't available and you know that you don't have bodily autonomy, that is a fundamental human right. It is literally spelled out from a human rights law that bodily autonomy is a thing. That is probably one of the most oppressive feelings ever.
Yeah,
I know you as men don't have to necessarily live in a world where you feel like your bodily autonomy is ever threatened. I do.
Yeah.
And that's hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah. And it's, if we could go back to, you mentioned earlier the situation of rape.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the most difficult situations. Probably the two most difficult situations involving abortion are rape and where the mom's health is at risk.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
even though statistically speaking, those are the vast minority of cases, they still need to be debated. I was just reading an article, a quick side note. It was on Guttmacher's website earlier today, and it mentioned that like the 4,000 abortions that happened in 2020 in Kentucky, only one of them was about the health of the child, health of the mom. So, it's interesting. These are the cases that get brought up a lot, but they're not the majority of the cases.
And I think it's sensationalized, right? I think where it comes to, though, is that abortion law takes away that feeling of bodily autonomy, and that alone already impacts me walking through this world.
Yeah. And again, that's not something, like you mentioned earlier, that's not something that Terry and I can really understand fully, but we will try to appreciate it and try to be considerate of it, and again, that's why I always, whenever I discuss abortion and things like this, I always feel that and I'll make the statement again, please, I'm not trying to be, sound like I have no compassion or that I don't care, I'm just trying to discuss this on a philosophical level. And I hope I don't come off cold to you.
Arguably, you sound more compassionate than me because I'm the one who said, yep, that's life, and I'm willing to take it. So let's be clear. You're sounding way compassionate.
I was going to say, you're scoring way better than the both of us.
I'm pretty sure I'm going to hear about this on Instagram.
Well, it'll start discussions for sure.
Right.
But to go to the situation of rape, here's kind of how I look at it. No matter what the girl in that situation chooses, it is going to be one of the most traumatic events of her life.
Yes.
So I think when you're put in a situation where all of your options, none of them are great options, I think you have to do what is best for all those who are involved. So let's take a look at the abortion side. Say she chooses to get an abortion. She has to deal with the trauma of the rape. On top of that, she has to deal with the trauma of abortion, which I mentioned earlier could include depression, could include physical side effects. And of course, the baby dies, right? A baby who is innocent, who had no say over how he or she was conceived. Now, let's say she chooses adoption, right? She chooses to go to term for her entire length of her pregnancy and give the child up for adoption. Those are going to be the worst 9 months of her life. It's going to be an absolute hell. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that in any way. Sure. But at least when those 9 months are done, she doesn't have to deal with the trauma of the abortion on top of the trauma of the rape. And the child does get a chance to live. Pope St. John Paul II, he had a great quote one time where he said that a woman who chooses life in a situation of rape is saintly. And I 100% agree with that, because that is the very definition of putting someone else's rights and someone else's well-being above your own. And so I know it would be incredibly hard to choose life in that kind of situation. But I think when you try to take a step back and look at it objectively and ask that question, which of the two options will do less harm to all people involved, I think you could make an argument that for the sake of both child and mother, that it would be better for the mom to choose to give the child up for adoption.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think logically I can absolutely hear you. I'm going to assume both of you on this have never been raped either, right?
No.
Yeah,
not really. No.
Okay.
we could say
I'll
that
take
for
a not really
episode.
from you, team.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, got it. Sure, add it to the
for
list.
love files.
Okay, yeah. So, but the answer I believe from UT is you haven't been. I don't know. I'm not asking that facetiously.
Let's go 50-50 for now.
Okay. So from a trauma perspective of rape, though, I just want to be real clear because I'm coming from that position here. It is a very complex trauma. associated with rape. And so it is not something that rape happens in an isolated situation and then you work through that isolated situation that took place. And so I do want to acknowledge to any of our listeners, if they've ever been in that experience of what trauma consistently and continues to exist throughout your life, and then some type of manifestation of that rape that never goes away, including in the form of a child, can be a very, very difficult reality that child doesn't get to choose either, right? So that child gets to grow up in this world and gets to want to know potentially, their birth parents. I see this happen, we hear about it, you see about it. And shouldn't that be then the right of that child that was brought into this world to want to know the biological mom? And so I put out all of these things to just make it really clear that they are complicated. So we can logically argue these things 100%, but there's such a level of complexity that comes with human trauma, which is why, again, I'm coming from that stage of having had particular experiences in life, wanting to say, how do I help women before they're ever in that situation? And I think that's where we can all agree is that's where we should be spending our time. Because if we can just be preventative in general to this, because you're right, no matter what, every scenario associated with this discussion is traumatic and life altering. Absolutely. And for that, I appreciate you from the male conversation. And T, I think that's, way back in the day when we started, doing these episodes on the podcast, it was me consistently, and I feel this again, thanking you all because your voices are so important in this. And from a listener perspective, I don't want anybody thinking, or feeling at all whatsoever that there isn't a place for male voices in this discussion, because you get to be just as effective. Because when women and girls aren't treated right, and we just need to be honest about that there's plenty of abortions that aren't happening for us to ever talk about rape or, how a woman felt when she lost her virginity or got pregnant, or our children in general are so skewed in their brains, right? And the things that are happening societally that you aren't going to hear about that abortion that was a rape. That girl may never get that abortion, or she may never say she was raped, but man, we are just very dysfunctional in our relationship with sex in this country, and the things that are taking place and happening are traumatic. They are not okay. And I think that's where sometimes these conversations are hard because we can only work on statistics, and I'm not suggesting we shouldn't, but those are all the areas that I want to focus on. Is you're right. I don't want to see 25 million unsafe abortions every year in the world. I don't want to see that, right? I don't want to see women in a state of no matter what, you're in trauma. I don't want to see that. I don't want to live with my trauma. I don't want that, right? And so how do we come together, on a united front and say, wow, we both agree that we got to figure out how to handle this from the get-go because it's not working what we're doing. I give it to the Catholic Church to tell people to wait until marriage, but dang, what else can we do?
It's interesting, and I point out this dichotomy to my students sometimes. I say, isn't it interesting how sex is everywhere in our society? It's in movies and television, in music. I mean, it's everywhere. But yet it's still this taboo thing to talk about. You still giggle when it's brought up and stuff like that. It's what a weird dichotomy.
Yeah. That really does lead to then all of the dysfunction around the topic. And I really do think then it's why this, we see a lot of things that are epidemic, whether it's teen pregnancy, whether it's, STDs, whether it's the dysfunction in how men and women treat each other, how men and men treat each other, how women and women treat each other. Our ability to maintain intimate relationships with each other is a struggle. And I think you're right. I think that is, T, I think that's how you wanted to wrap this, was finding some common ground. I think we know what we got to do together, right? I don't, pro-life, pro-choice, we're pro, how do we educate a society to make the right choices and to treat each other right so that we aren't in this situation? That's ideal to me.
100% agree.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think everyone gets so caught up in the once we're there, now, do you support it? Do you not support it? And man, sometimes I think we got to take that step back and go, how do we just not end up in this situation? And I understand that sounds idealistic, yes. But the more we focus on that, I think the greater impact we get to have.
And that's how you enact real change societally.
Yes.
You enact real
Yes.
change through education, through discussion.
Yep.
If we just make abortion illegal, while that's great that abortion is illegal, if we don't educate people on why it should be illegal, if we don't educate people on what it does to a child, what it does to a woman, if we don't educate people on how women who are pregnant can now get help, if we don't create more programming that can help those women, you have to couple changes with education, because if you don't, then you're just missing the point.
Yeah. Which I think is the very essence of Catch the Sky, T, right? That's what we're doing here.
I'm just thinking back to a solution to all of this, and we look back at our birth control episode, and we could just like have males just all get vasectomies from like 16 to 22, and then we flip them back at that point. I think that'll just cut back on a lot of the problems, just all the college years. I think that'll.
What was that about bodily autonomy?
Right,
yeah, right. I know, right?
Well,
no,
yeah,
I
let's
think he
flip
missed
the
the
script.
education part.
Well, let's flip the script for a little bit. Let's flip the script for a little bit, right? The guys, if we're gonna do it to women, then we got to do it to guys for a little bit, right?
No, I'm going to hold you even
It's
more
only 6
accountable to
years.
the harder thing, which is the getting educated, not just physically stopping. But I think this is a mental, emotional conversation about our maturity as human beings, to not shut down the conversation, which is why I love this podcast, because our whole thing is to absolutely come here and have this conversation, not to suggest that it's too taboo to talk about, or I feel like I can't say something. No, we work through it. We get there and we end up at this stage where we go, dang, we know what we got to do, and we know what we got to do together. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So, is there anything else that either you feel like you want to add on this subject at the moment? I know we could go on forever about it. I mean, this is how many episodes have we done about this now?
Well, and it's a super pertinent topic, and I think we've made some serious progress here. So, Corey, I appreciate this, because I think this is as a listener of the podcast too. I know that sounds weird. I love the outcome of not just T and I rattling off back at each other, but also acknowledging that we know that there are fundamental disagreements out there amongst people, but that common ground is so close. It's so close. And look how fast we found it together. Look how fast we found it together to acknowledge that we both agree that there's an education component to this, that we both agree that we don't want anybody in this situation, and that we both have a responsibility. Then our responsibility is the same, is to help each other and our future generations stay out of the situation to the best of our ability. And that's where our effort needs to be. And then that life that is in this world, we better take care of it. We better take care of it. Right?
Darn right.
Yeah.
And, especially with the elections coming up, I already saw one political ad that was focused primarily on attacking the other person's position on abortion. When people go to the polls, it's not enough to just look at what they view about abortion. You also have to look at what they plan to do to help people who are pregnant and scared. Will I, of course, support a pro-life candidate, a true pro-life candidate? Of course. But I want these people that we elect to not just be anti-abortion. I want them to be pro-women. I want them to help out women who are in need, who are struggling, who are scared. Like I said, we've got to increase our funding, got to increase our awareness of programs that can help women out.
Yeah. How are we going to treat that life that we support being here,
And that's, yeah.
Exactly.
So that's where,
for sure,
I've always, until we start seeing those types of changes and we get the population doesn't seem to be out of control in this country. It seems to be pretty consistent over the last couple decades, but it's a global issue. And if we wipe ourselves out in one form or another due to overpopulation, climate change, war, what have you, then it's kind of going to be a moot point either way. And that's where I've always said, I saw that statement and I use it a lot, is like you can be pro-life in a pro-choice world, because a pro-choice world allows you to choose whatever you want. But in the pro-life world, it is, we have to. If we're going to have a pro-life world, then it needs to be a much better world than what we currently have or are heading towards. That's definitely, I think, something like,
Yeah, our responsibility shifts then. Our responsibility shifts in a pro-life world. That paradigm has to shift if that's the world we're going to live in. And so I think, that really does become incumbent. Like, I can still have my beliefs and hold strongly to them and press forward for them. But at the end of the day, the adaptability of a human, if I really, really believe so intently on that belief, I better be capable of being adaptable. No different than the pro-life believers have had to be in a pro-choice world too, right? Because you've had to acknowledge that the opportunity for abortion is right there, right? And so if you believe so intensely for the right to life, then you've had to acknowledge how to communicate and how to operate in a world that abortion is an option right there, and you're trying to help people not make that choice. We're at that same stage then. As a pro-choice believer, I have to be adaptable and go, okay, I might not have that right to choice at this stage, but I do have the choice right now to spend that time trying to figure out how to reach that population that doesn't have to end up in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Might not be ideal, but I better not give up. Like, I think that's the one thing that we both acknowledge too, is that we're not giving up, right? It's real easy to go, well, my side lost. No.
No.
Plenty of opportunity out there to still, again, help people not end up in the situation in the first place. Yep. Idealistic, sure, but that's what we're here for. We're trying to catch a sky, That sounds hard.
You know what, though? Like, I'll be real quick because I know we're running out of time. I heard this really cool story one time, and maybe I told it to you, Terry, when I taught you. I tell it to a lot of my students. Just kind of pops into my head sometimes. It's called the starfish story. Have you guys ever heard of this?
For the listeners' sake, refresh our memory. Familiar.
So there's this kid, it's fictitious, obviously, but there's this kid that's on a beach, and the beach is covered in starfish because the tide are washing them up. And he's picking them up one at a time, and he's chucking them into the water. And this kind of grizzled, old guy walks up, and he says, "What are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I'm chucking these starfish back in the water." And the old man starts attacking the kid. He starts saying, "Are you idiot? You're not making any difference. Look, the tide's bringing them all back up on the shore. Everyone you chuck out there, and there's thousands on this beach, and you're only one person." He goes, "What difference are you going to make?" And the kid bends down and he picks up a starfish and he chucked it back in the water. And he said, "Well, I made a difference for that one."
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how we should approach things in life, is that if we can do our part to try to make the world a little bit better, and hopefully other people will join us on the beach, and then the change will happen. Because it can be maddening sometimes when you're going up against, these things that are so huge, like whether it's, I mentioned pro-life earlier, like if you're going against racism or the death penalty or abortion or physician-assisted suicide or sexism, global problems, it can get very overwhelming. But I think you just got to do what you can, and hopefully others will join you on the beach.
Yeah, I agree. T knows how much I love finding myself on a beach, so.
Well, yes, I do.
That second Mexico story is coming later.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the second Mexico story. Oh my God. Well, Corey, thank you again for joining us on this episode. Dick, as always.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. This was great.
Yeah, super, super appreciate the conversation. Look forward to more for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'll come back anytime you want me.
We might just have to take you up on that. And
you open the door, now you're going to regret it.
And if you care to comment on anything that you heard, be sure to do so on Twitter at CTS Terry or at I'm Dick Francisco. You can find Dick on Instagram at the Dick Francisco, and you might find us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts by searching for the Catch the Sky podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe for weekly episodes every Friday at 6. And until next week, keep trying to catch the sky.